Chapter 27. Hubris Squared. With a sharp crack of blinding light, the storm shot a finger of power down into Charles Kaiser's kingdom fortress. Every man-made source of light across the keep instantly winked out. It was a fitting act, Charles thought. All of his power, all of his influence, everything that represented who he was disappearing, bit by bit. One man was doing all of this. One man was dismantling his empire. Brick by brick, Charles Kaiser was being erased from history. This man must be stopped, but for the life of him, he had no idea how to quell the bleeding. To make matters worse, he had just been informed there were defections within the ranks. His people were vanishing away into the night like everything else he owned. The second-in-command at his attack nightclub, the very same one that had lied to him saying there were 30 armed assailants instead of the actual 2 there really were, had run for the hills. And it looked like he had taken a few more with him. There were others located here at the keep that came up missing as well. They were abandoning him, one by one, slipping away, sneaking off into the darkness like rats in a sewer. They would regret their decision. They would pay, he silently vowed. In the depths of his subconscious, buried deep beneath a newfound reservoir of self-control, the monster known as Big Chuck howled in frustration. He beat upon the walls of his confinement, but they were barely heard as muffled thuds. "Your time will come," Charles quietly promised. He would unleash the beast to roam across the earth with abandon, like a giant Jurassic-era creature, crushing everything underfoot. For now, however, he needed to piece this puzzle together. There was a solution to all of this, a way to regain everything that had been lost to him, and turn it around to make it all work to his advantage. Reason and intelligence would rule the day here. He had released the family members of his adversaries agreed to, but there had been no word from El Gran Blanco since. Charles tried reaching out to him through the app on his phone, but however the other had been able to infiltrate his app and communicate with him, Charles had not been able to reciprocate that ability. The other had become a bottomless well of unanswered questions, and the longer that silence lingered, the more certain Charles was that the assassin had reneged on their agreement. He stood in the darkness of his office, facing the giant windows, hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the rain and lightning. The unrelenting and raging storm was a metaphor of the anger that twisted in his heart, and the unceasing efforts of the man now known to him as the vicious hired killer, El Gran Blanco. He made a bad decision, he now reasoned. He should have murdered his captives instead of entering into an agreement with a professional killer for their release. He apparently crossed a line with the murderer. As a result, the man was now going to make it his mission to not only ruin his empire but take his life. In fact, he was now very sure that much like Mason, both Hudson and Ward had become the latest victims added to the assassin's long list. If the assassin had indeed broken their agreement, and Charles was now very sure he had, then not only were his last 2 remaining sons dead, but the man was coming for him as well. Tonight, in all likelihood, El Gran Blanco would use the cover of darkness and the storm to seek Big Chuck out. The killer had used the spectacular murders of the Castro regime's Council of 12 to launch and build his reputation. He was now going to make it even more infamous and profitable by doing the same to the mafia boss that was Big Chuck. "Remy!" he shouted over the thunderous drone of the rain hammering away on the roof above his head. The man entered. "We're under attack. I have a feeling our enemy is already here in the keep, and we're now blind because of all of this," he said, waving his arms at the chaos going on outside of the windows. "Have everyone equip himself with night vision and sweep through every building and comb through every alley. We're looking for one man, an assassin, but he's well armed and extremely lethal. Offer a $1 million bounty to the one that brings me his body. No rest for anyone. He's here. I'm sure of it. Find him." Remy produced a radio from beneath his jacket and issued commands, disappearing through the door as he did so. For his part, Charles stayed where he was and turned his attention back to the storm. He would not be donning night vision goggles and stalking his prey through the darkness. He would let others do that for him. Nor did he need to seek out a weapon and arm himself. He was well equipped with the colossus of a pistol strapped beneath his expensive suit jacket. He would wait and let his enemy come to him. He would be both the bait and the trap. The man wanted him dead, but he did not expect Charles would be waiting for him. In that, there was an advantage. Charles caught a clear image in his mind. The tragic end to a field mouse, head split in two by thin steel wires it made to steal the cheese from the trap. Come for me, Charles thought. Let's end this now. He was still standing there looking out at the storm minutes later, when an explosion tore through the building across from him, shattering a good many of the perfectly square panes of glass separating him from the storm. Rain and wind pushed in through the newly formed opening, bathing him in water and broken glass, and he reflexively took a step back. Below him, angry flames pushed their way out of the lower openings of the building as he watched, casting an orange glow around the entire area, and then extinguishing just as quickly as they had come. Remy rushed into the room behind him, shouting his name, worried his boss had been hurt. Charles waved his hand to silence him, stepping closer to the window to look out. Rain, hurled by the driving wind, stabbed at his face, and he quickly tried to shield himself by bringing up an arm. His eyes probed the building across from him, looking, studying, trying to discover the source of the blast. Had lightning ignited some explosives? What had caused the sudden destruction? From one of the entrances to the damaged building, he could make out a soft, flickering orange glow as something burned deep within. There, across from him, in the shadows and murky wet gloom, hiding in the darkness and the driving rain, he thought he saw movement. Was it one of his men? Were they injured? He thought for a moment to call out, to shout a question, to demand a report be given of the cause. Lightning sliced through the heavens and momentarily lit the courtyard-like area below him in strobing brilliance. In that flickering moment, he could now see the person standing below him 50 yards away, a solitary figure, dripping in weapons and rain, a headband tied around his head being whipped about by the wind. He stood paused in the opening that used to be a garage door. It was him, El Gran Blanco himself. He was certain of it. He was looking right at Charles. He knew in that brief, illuminated instant who the other was. Despite the distance, they could see the look of recognition wash across the other's face. The lightning vanished, and with it, Charles's view of the other. He quickly stepped back away from the window and was thankful he did. A hail of fully automatic gunfire sent a burst of projectiles through the space he had been standing, annihilating the remainder of the window. "Remy!" he shouted. "Men on the stairs and elevator, now!" Remy raced back through the doors to carry out his orders. It was time, he told the chained beast inside him. You are free now to do as you wish, but you must remain here and allow your prey to come to you. A roar climbed its way up from the depths of his soul, a shouting cry of defiance and rage that strained his vocal cords and burst through any control he had left. Charles Kaiser was gone, obliterated by the vicious arrival of his darker half. Big Chuck was now in charge. Lightning broke through the heavens once more, casting his office in harsh white light. But everything Big Chuck could see was shaded in crimson hues. Chapter break. Perspective change. DJ was able to stealthily take out 3 more soldiers on his way through the maze of warehouses. Each kill had been completed with a single silent shot from his confiscated M4. He still had 27 rounds in that weapon, 11 rounds in his offhand pistol, 7 in his right, and 17 in the one mounted high on his vest in the cross-draw holster. Plus, plenty of ammunition in reserve for all of them. In this building, however, he encountered a troubling situation. Choosing to sneak through the darkened building instead of going around put him directly across from 6 soldiers smoking cigarettes in the shadows and softly chatting. Sheltering from the rain outside, they were clueless he was here, contemplating their death, hidden nearby in the darkness. He placed one of them in the red glowing circle of his hollow sight attached to the M4, but held off due to indecision. If he pulled the trigger and killed the first one, he would face 5 other heavily armed soldiers now alerted to his location. He could probably get through 3 in total before the rest started moving and shooting back. He was confident he could handle the remaining 3 without issue, but they also had radios. They would announce his presence to the entire force of men that roamed through these buildings. And worse, they would notify Big Chuck himself. That would surely make his mission that much harder. He thought about backtracking and then circling the building outside, but that would expose him from many locations, including the roof line where he spotted at least a couple of snipers skulking through the rain with night scopes, like the one he had used back at the cabin. What to do? The radio in his ear crackled to life. A man with a thick accent started barking orders. The person speaking carried the air of authority in his voice. It sharply informed to all listening they were under attack. A single-armed invader was even now trying to infiltrate their heavily armed compound. Just the one man was all they had to deal with, they were told. But he was extremely armed and very deadly. Exercise caution. DJ smiled in agreement. To the one that managed to bag their target, $1 million prize was being promised. Cash. Wow, DJ considered. That's a lot of money for little old me. I guess there's no use in trying to sneak around anymore. Across from him, the others were still and motionless, as they considered what their boss was telling them over the radio. DJ tried to decide which one of them would die first, and he knew he needed to make that decision quickly. That's when he stumbled across a better idea. Located behind the group was a forklift, parked against the wall, the kind powered not by gasoline, but by propane, its large tank set reflecting the sharp white light of the random illumination of lightning through a nearby window. That would make for a really nice explosion, and perhaps take a couple of them out with one shot. Next to the forklift, however, was a large wire enclosed set of metal cabinets, used for storing multiple tanks to be used as refills. That would make for a much bigger explosion. It could even take them all out. But would it be big enough to hurt him as well, standing nearly 30 yards away? Only one way to find out. DJ took aim at one of the cylinders, closed his eyes, and pulled the trigger. The roar was deafening. Heated, rapidly expanding gases propelled him backwards. He felt himself staggering, and then something heavy and hard struck him full on in the chest. One more time, breath left his body, and he sat down hard on the concrete. He remained there for a moment, blinking, and then checked himself over. Everything seemed fine. All of his parts were undamaged and still where they were supposed to be. He was still alive and able to press on. Across from him, a body was burning, casting an orange reflecting glow in a soft circle. In that glow, DJ was able to spot what had drilled him in the chest. His stomach rolled with queasiness. A severed head. The exploding canisters had separated a soldier's head from his body and then cannonballed it directly at DJ. He scrambled to his feet and away, quickly sidestepping around the open-eyed face. He forced himself to keep from staring back in utter revulsion. Slowly, then, he made his way forward, approaching a gaping hole in the building that had been formed when a nearby garage door was blown outward. Weapon half raised, searching for more targets, for people that should be running towards him even now, he crept towards the opening. For a moment he saw nothing, only another building beyond. He couldn't remember, was this the building he was looking for, or was it the next one in line? He should break out the phone again and check for Big Chuck's whereabouts. His eyes searched the blackened building across from him, looking for enemies that were certain to be hidden within. He was close now, for sure. His eyes moved upwards, desperate to penetrate past the impossibly dark windows. If only he had some of those night vision goggles. Lightning spiderwebbed its way across the sky, electrical tendrils crawling from cloud to cloud, and momentarily cast pulsating white light through the entire area, revealing all. There, in a window high above, an impossibly large figure, ignoring the wind and the rain, a giant of a man in a three-piece suit, standing in the wreckage of a splintered window. Their eyes met. Recognition. Understanding. His enemy stood above him, alone in his high tower. Big Chuck was waiting for him. The lightning vanished and the world descended into darkness once more. Faster than thought, DJ raised his rifle to his shoulder, aimed at where he remembered Big Chuck to be, flipped his selector switch to full auto, and hammered away with a long vibrating string of bullets. Repetitive thwapping sounded from the silenced M4. The cycling bolt rushed to dump expended shells off to the right and slightly in front of him in rapid succession. He held off emptying the entire mag and paused. His finger left the trigger and moved to the magazine release button along the side. He sent the quarter-filled magazine falling towards the ground and snatched another full one from a pouch on his vest. He slapped it home with practiced precision, all the while continuing to aim upwards at where Big Chuck had stood. He waited for a moment longer. He silently begged the raging storm for another burst of lightning, something to show him if he had been successful or if he still had a target to shoot at. Darkness, wind, rain, nothing. He could wait no longer and must assume he missed, and his target had moved away in time. He bolted across the opening towards the building in front of him. He needed to make sure. Big Chuck must die, along with anyone in his path. Just off to the left was an open door. Beyond it was darker than the night itself. First opportunity he had, he must try to appropriate some of those night vision goggles, or the inability to see the bad guys was going to prematurely end this fight. Lightning raced through the heavens above him, sending strobing white light into the black entryway. Too late, he saw a man, a soldier. The very same night vision goggles DJ now coveted were staring right at him over the barrel of an assault rifle. The unknown man was already aiming. DJ was not. The man fired as DJ was bringing his rifle up. He took two, right to the center of his chest. DJ was protected by the bulletproof vest he had acquired earlier, but the rounds still took their toll on his body. The M-Fire fired a NATO standard .556 round. Its projectile traveled at roughly 1,800 feet per second, well over the speed of sound. Because of that speed, the kinetic energy transferred to its target at close range was somewhere north of 1,300 foot-pounds. Depending on the ammunition chosen, that was over 4 times as much as the 9mm handguns he had strapped all over his body. It was like someone picked up a baseball bat and tried to knock him out of the park. Twice. The air left his lungs once more, and the shock to his body interrupted his brain's ability to send signals to his legs. They wobbled and stopped functioning for a split second, sending DJ into a forward collapse across the rain-soaked pavement. He managed to twist as he was going down and aimed the barrel of his own M4 in the soldier's general direction. The weapon was still locked into full auto, and DJ let loose with a full mag as he fell. He willed the barrel to rise as it fired, and it answered his plea. The first few rounds missed, passing between the guy's knees, and then they started connecting at the groin. Bullet after bullet tore through the soldier's manhood, then began to walk their way up his middle as he divided the guy in half. The soldier might have been wearing a vest for protection, but there were so many impacts in areas that were not covered, it really didn't matter. First a few rounds through his groin and lower abdomen, then more ending at his neck and the beginnings of his head. The last 3 rounds ripped through the laryngeal prominence, more commonly known as the Adam's apple, the chin, and the bridge of his nose. The soldier hunched forward from the repeated impacts, and finally tilted over like a felled tree right next to DJ, lying in the rain. DJ gasped for air, struggling to get life-giving oxygen into his body. His chest screamed harder with each attempt to breathe, and part of him wanted to just give up. He was tired, exhausted. His body informed him that it was done. Too little sleep, no chance to recover from expending energy. He was bruised, all over. His shoulder still hurt from the wreck. His forehead pounded from the gunshot wound. His chest felt like someone impaled him with a spear. Even both wrists ached from the assault of the ninja-like warrior from earlier. Pain traveled through him from literally every part of his body. It told him, demanded of him, to quit. Just lay there and sleep. No, he argued with himself. Press on to the finish line. You're almost there. With tremendous effort, he pushed away from the open door and body rolled slowly away from the threat of the exposed entrance until he was lying against the wall of the building. He left the empty M4 where it was. If he was going to take this fight inside, he would need mobility. The length of the M4 would just get in the way. He would use the pistols now. He should have more than enough ammunition to get the job done. The way he now lay, he was more on his back than on his side, up against the wall, and with his head closer to the door than his feet, he tilted his head back to watch the entrance where he lay there, gasping for air, attempting to just restore his breathing. Rain drove hard at his face, and he blinked and flinched as he watched the door. 2 more soldiers stepped into the night in the rain, illuminated a more pulsating light from the storm. M4 rifles raised, sweeping left and right, hunting for him, their night vision goggles probing the darkness. They did not look hard enough to their left. They did not see him off to one side. He really needed some of those goggles, he told himself. He drew with his left and aimed carefully. At this angle, it was more like he was shooting upside down. So he took extra time in order to make sure he got this right. His first round took the guy closest to him right near his ear. The second man turned, jerking DJ's direction, aware now he was under attack. The soldier's goggles served him well, and he quickly spotted DJ lying against the building like so much discarded trash. He snapped a hastily fired round, and the bullet passed through the wall just above DJ's head. DJ's own round answered, and split the man's goggle clean in two as it traveled through his skull. Can't use those goggles, DJ thought to himself. 9 rounds in his left weapon, 7 in his right, and a full mag on the one mounted to his vest. He waited for a moment more, but no one else ventured through. He groaned and rolled to his knees. Then he paused again. He was in a lot of pain. He really needed to do something about that. He holstered the left and drew the right-sided weapon. With his left hand, he dug into his front jeans pocket, looking for the prescription bottle of Oxy. He was not really keen on doping himself up with pain meds, ever, especially when he needed to keep his mind clear. But he had to do something to take the edge off. His pain was impeding his ability to perform. Oxycontin was a slower-releasing narcotic. It usually started working after 30 minutes, and then would sustain its effect for up to 12 hours depending on dosage. But DJ needed relief faster than that. In 30 minutes, this would all be over. There were 3 surefire ways of having the drug hit harder and quicker. The first was to crush them up, dilute the mixture in a shot glass full of water, and shoot it straight into the veins. Not an option here. The second was to do the same, but then drink the solution. Depending on metabolism, he could start feeling the effects in about 5 minutes. Certainly a viable option considering the conditions. For one, he had access to all the water he needed. The third was to crush it into lines like cocaine and snort it. He would feel the effects almost immediately. He liked that idea the most, but he would need someplace dry, and at least 60 seconds to get the job done. He pocketed the Oxy once more. He would have to wait just a bit longer. For now, he would just have to ignore the pain. Maybe he could enter the building from an alternate location. Chances are they were watching this one pretty close. In fact, he was sure if he stepped through the door, he probably wouldn't live very long. First things first, though. It was time to change the mags. If he was going inside, he wanted to make sure all his pistols were full. He did so quickly, tucking the partially depleted ones into a vest pocket instead of just tossing them aside. One never got rid of perfectly good ammo. Also, he needed a pair of those goggles. He had 3 options close to him. One was destroyed, but 2 of them were in perfect working order and close by. One in the doorway, which seemed too dangerous to approach now, and the other on a dead body lying about 10 feet away from the entrance. He bolted from his location, and his body shouted at him. He had been motionless far too long, and already his tired and bruised body had stiffened. He gritted his teeth and pushed through, pausing to take a knee and rip the goggles off the dead man lying in the rain. Bullets tore through the night, passing all around. They smacked the dead body, ricocheted off the pavement, and passed dangerously close to his head. He sprinted away as fast as he could, goggles in hand as a round grazed the upper thigh of his left leg. He didn't even bother to break his stride, but rather stretched it out to get himself clear of the open doorway. Bullets tore through the night, passing all around. They smacked the dead body, ricocheted off the pavement, and passed dangerously close to his head. He sprinted away as fast as he could, goggles in hand, as a round grazed the upper thigh of his left leg. He didn't even bother to break his stride, but rather stretched it out to get himself clear of the open doorway. The bullet stopped, but he kept sprinting anyway, headed for the corner of the building to the north. He would swing around it, then double back to check for pursuers. If there were none, he would continue to circle the building and look for another way in. As he rounded the corner at full speed, he collided with 2 more soldiers headed his direction. He grunted from the impact and bodies went everywhere. DJ fell one way, but the 2 others managed to keep their feet, though they were sent staggering away from him. The goggles were dropped from the collision, freeing up both hands to grab for pistols. He did so, simultaneously allowing his body to roll with the fall. He came to a rest on his back, crushing the backpack beneath him, but propping him up like he was about to watch a movie in bed. From his position, both were fanned out away from him in the direction of his feet. He couldn't really see their heads in the darkness, so a clear target was not visible. Instead, he dumped 3 rounds apiece into the darker shadows he knew to be their bodies, and they were sent staggering back from him once more. Lightning flashed and flickered. His targets were now clearly visible. DJ smiled at his fortune, and both enemy soldiers dropped into the rain from bullets reducing their brains to useless goo. 13 rounds, both in the left and the right-hand pistol, a full load for the one secured to his vest. He gathered himself up from the ground and sloshed around until he found his lost goggles. He placed them on his head and the whole world became visible to him. Everything was cast into shades of green, but the detail that had been missing in the wet night were now available for him to see. He checked to make sure, but there were no more signs of pursuit from the door he had run away from. It made perfect sense to DJ. Why step out and be vulnerable? They had a great defensive position where they were, and they knew DJ wanted inside. Just wait for him to step through the door and unload on him. He continued around the building. It was a large 4-story metal cube with warehouse-style windows all on the second floor and higher, too high to reach from the ground without a boost of some sort. However, something up ahead opened up a possibility for him. A yellow and black front-end loader was parked alongside the building up ahead. At least, he assumed it was yellow and black. Weren't they all? From his night vision goggles, everything appeared in multiple grades of green. Parked right next to the building, he figured he could climb on top and reach one of the windows. Many of them were tilted out slightly, allowing for ventilation. If he could reach one, he might be able to crawl through onto the second floor. He would bypass the heavily armed welcome committees he was sure awaited him at every ground floor access point. Speaking of welcome committees, he had heard no chatter over the radio recently. He doubted they were onto the fact he had confiscated one of their radios. Was the one he was wearing turned off by his tumbling around? He reached back over his right shoulder and pulled the thing free from its pouch. It came out in pieces, destroyed. A bullet had smashed it into useless shards of plastic and busted electronics. Great, he thought, as he tossed it to the ground. So much for listening in. He started up, pulling and grabbing at the ladder to the cab. His climb was interrupted by a sharp, deafening clap of thunder and lightning strike. It was close as physically possible without being struck down. He could feel the electrical charge cover his body in a tingling embrace. The light and volume was so intense, and it startled him so bad, he slipped on the wet steel of the front end loader and fell backwards to the ground. Landing on his feet, he pulled the goggles free from his face as they momentarily went white from the bright flash of lightning. Overloaded by the amount of light, they had been rendered briefly useless. They would return to normal in just a second. He stood a moment and waited for his vision to adjust. Lightning raced across the sky above in long, reaching arcs. It lit the area around him in pulsating light, and he was stunned by what he saw. Another soldier had been sneaking up behind him, large dagger in hand, seeking to skewer him just for the fun of it, instead of just simply shooting him while he was unaware. Mother Nature, or something else, had intervened on his behalf and struck the man down in a fiery blast. The body lay twisted in charred angles, smoldering in the rain. One burnt and blackened hand was held high, frozen in place, shiny blade stretched towards the heavens. DJ turned his face to the clouds, then back again to stare at the charred form in the rain. He slipped his goggles back on and stared at the figure for a second more, filled with sheer incredulity. He refocused himself then, and resumed his task of climbing the heavy equipment. It was fate, he decided. Either that, or he'd been spiritually ordained to finally remove the blight on humanity known as Big Chuck. He was suddenly filled with more confidence now than at any other time since this whole thing began. It might mean a painful struggle all the way through, but he now knew he was going to win. In the end, he was going to be standing as the victor. No two ways about it. Just press on towards the goal and the prize. Emboldened by his newfound confidence, he felt he no longer needed the oxy to help see him through. A fresh new dose of adrenaline gave him all the boost he needed. Chapter break. Perspective change. Jared Dane stood in the darkness of a converted room on the 3rd floor of Big Chuck's makeshift office building. As this was not really an office building, just a brick and steel ancient warehouse, there was no emergency lighting. The only light from which he could see his surroundings was the lighting that blasted past dirty vintage windows set high above his head. He had come this night with a bit of news for Big Chuck, news he intended only for the crime boss to see with his own eyes, news he insisted would only come from him after he stood face to face with the mythic man. That had proven to be impossible, and nearly gotten him killed when he made the demand to the rough-looking men guarding one of the entrances to this well-armed compound. He counted himself lucky to have only been knocked around a bit before they went through his things, found a bunch of paperwork they really didn't understand, and then summoned a higher-ranking person to come check him out. That man, a well-dressed black man with an island accent, looked through his things too. He did, apparently, understand the paperwork he held in his hands. It caused Jared to be escorted into the very building he now stood. He was placed under guard while the man in charge went to confer with Big Chuck about Jared and the paperwork he was carrying. After a long while, the black man returned and informed him that Big Chuck was busy with very pressing matters at the moment, that Big Chuck had been attacked and was concerned that Jared might be in danger. He was at Big Chuck's orders, setting up guest accommodations for him on the 3rd floor. They certainly did not look or feel like guest accommodations. There was air conditioning. There was a bed and a couch. There was a large TV. But that was as far as the resemblance went to guest accommodations. It was nothing more than a large storage room in a larger warehouse, with a single bare bulb hanging from a wire in the middle of the ceiling. The 2 guards in the room with him glared menacingly at him any time Jared looked their way. They were for his protection, he was told. But Jared knew differently. He was told as soon as Big Chuck could make time for him, he would do so. But Jared knew in reality that Big Man was deciding his fate. Should Jared live or die? Should he be embraced or burned and buried with the paperwork he brought with him? Whatever, Jared thought. The die had been cast. If Big Chuck embraced him and brought him into the fold, then he had a new chance at a better life. If he was thrown into a 6-foot hole in the ground, well, then that was fine too. He had nothing left to live for anyway. Whatever. He'd been sitting on the couch silently taking bets with himself over which was his likely fate when the lights went out. From the occasional illumination by the thunderstorm that had manifested out of nowhere, he could see that his armed attackers were nervous about something that they were hearing over the radios. They kept placing a hand to the earpieces and sharing worried looks. Both had large military-looking rifles slung over their backs when he was at first in prison. Shortly after the lights went out, however, they switched them to a ready-to-shoot-someone pose and kept staring intently at the door. Then an explosion went off, somewhere close, and the building reverberated and shook. His armed watchers yelled at him to stay put, rushed out of the room and slammed the door behind them. He was left in silence and darkness, broken occasionally by the crashing of thunder and lightning. The storm was truly freaky. The last forecast he had seen said clear and warm all the way into next week. But here it was, the largest, most violent thunderstorm he had ever seen, beating down upon the building he was now being held in. It proved weathermen truly had no idea what they were talking about. How could global warming scientists not be able to accurately forecast the weather only hours away, but could somehow declare what the weather would be like 20 years from now? He wondered if some of those so-called science deniers might actually be right. Thunder shook the panes of glass again, high above his head. That's it, he decided. I'm not staying here anymore. If Big Chuck really was under attack by a rival, well, he wasn't going to just sit here and listen. Thunder shook the panes of glass again, high above his head. That's it, he decided. He was not staying here anymore. If Big Chuck really was under attack by a rival, he was not going to just sit there. Maybe this would help improve his potential loyalty. He would head out like the rest of the men who worked for Big Chuck and fight the enemy like they did. Of course, he didn't have a weapon at all, but he would cross that bridge when he came to it. The bottom line was, he was not going to sit here bored, useless, and all alone. Jared made his way to the door and tried the knob. It turned freely in his hand, and the door swung open with a tired groan. The hallway beyond was an inky void in the night. Nothing could be made out. There was no way for his eyes to adjust to the darkness, as there was simply no light to see from. Not a hint. Not a trace. He listened, but the only thing he could hear was the relentless beating of the storm on the windows in his room. A lightning flash from behind him helped probe the hallway. It was a wide, featureless passage, nearly 15 feet across. Another pitted, dusty brick wall lay on the opposite side of him. Darkness returned, leaving him with choices. He didn't know what lay to his left, but the stairs they had used, along with the large freight elevator, set around a corner somewhere far to his right. If he remembered correctly, there were more windows near the stairway. If he could make it there, perhaps the persistent lightning flashes could help him locate them without breaking his neck in the process. As if on cue, another blast of pulsing light drove the darkness away, allowing him to see into the hallway once more. He turned right and felt his way along the wall. Another brief flash lasting only a second, and he could see the corner that would lead him to the stairs far down the hallway. He made his way slowly, feeling along the rough wall and shuffling carefully across the concrete floor. Another varying yet sustained blast of light, though dimmer as he was farther away from the source, guided him along. He wasn't sure, but he thought he could see a simultaneous flicker from somewhere up ahead. Maybe from those windows he thought were around the corner. Reaching, groping, shuffling, he kept moving forward. He wasn't sure what he would do when he got there, but anything was better than being holed up in his room of confinement. Whatever happened, he had decided he would make a difference. He would show Big Chuck his value. He would help the man make his decision, one favorable to them both, he committed to himself. He would prove his worth. He reached the corner and peered around into the darkness. He saw nothing but blackness. He couldn't even make out his hand in front of his face. How far away was the stairs? If he proceeded around the corner and took a wrong step, it would mean a lot of pain and agony. Maybe worse. Another flash of lightning and accompanying crash of thunder answered his questions. High up, maybe 10 or 12 feet above his head, and further around the corner, light streaked through a narrow window sitting horizontally in the brick, casting flickering shadows ahead. There, he saw it, a cold black stairway descending down to the second floor beyond, to where the unknown attackers were. But it also provided a pathway upwards to the fourth, where Big Chuck was, and that Jared had been banished from. Next to it, a freight elevator with its closed iron gates barring entry, useless without electricity. The flash of light revealed all in an instant, and then returned him to his blind world. Down, no question about it. He would head down. Jared shuffled forward, both hands out, timidly reaching into the unknown, looking for the opposite wall next to the stairs. Too far to the right, and he would find the open stairwell, and a stumble on that first step would be disastrous. He had to be careful. Slowly he pushed his way forward into the darkness. Something hit him, hard, the blow catching him on the side of the head and sending him reeling. Shooting stars swam across his blackened vision, making them more seen and noticed. He found the ground, face first. Hard concrete peeled away the upper layer of skin from his nose and cheek like sandpaper. Another blow, this one to his ribs on the left side. His breath vanished, and he felt something crack and give from the impact. He had been kicked, he realized. Whoever had attacked grabbed hold of him and flipped him over. Lightning flashed again, softly illuminating his surroundings from the window high in the wall. Jared saw him then, up close and personal. A nightmare vision from a big screen movie, crouched over him with a long black gun aimed between Jared's eyes. He was dripping water from all over, and Jared could only assume he had come in from the storm. The man was wearing a pair of those night vision goggles, making him look like some sort of weird alien. He had a long, wet bandana tied around his head, like that muscled actor from a popular film he had seen so long ago. Jared was scared, petrified, not to mention his face was smarting from contact from the floor. He couldn't breathe from both the blow to his ribs and from the fear clawing its way up from the depths of his being. And while he could not be certain, he was pretty sure he was bleeding all over the place. The man disappeared back into the night as the lightning faded away. But Jared could feel his presence looming over him. His shirt collar was suddenly clutched in a damp, hard fist. He was lifted from the ground into a half-sitting position, and their faces were pressed close together. Jared could feel the man's breath on his skin, and he closed his eyes in abject fear of what might happen next. "You're no guard," the man declared. "You look more like a paper pusher. Who are you?" Jared stammered. Words caught in his throat as he struggled to form a response. The man shook him violently one good hard time and pressed the warm steel of his gun to Jared's forehead. "I won't ask again. the demon in the dark declared. Warm steel. The gun was warm, not cold and wet from the rain. That meant it had been fired. Recently. It was still warm from having killed someone, or someones, plural. Sudden understanding flooded Jared as he realized who was kneeling over him was not a guard that found him wandering free from his room, but was the feared enemy that had declared war on the giant upstairs. At least one of them. Who knew exactly how many invaders had attacked this fortress compound? But here was one of them, asking who he was. He had left his room determined to show Big Chuck he could be just as beneficial to his empire as any other member of his mafia family. He declared himself he would go forward and fight alongside the others that were trying to repel this unknown enemy. He would prove himself. But now here the enemy was, face to face with him, looming over him, and the only thing Jared could think of was the fact that he suddenly had to pee. In fact, it was very likely he was going to wet himself right now. And then he was. An uncontrolled release of urine began to coat his lower extremities in a warm, wet flood. He began to cry then, from both fear and shame. The blubbering welled up within him and came out in a torrent. "I'm just a captive," he babbled through his tears. "He was trying to extort my business for money. I own a car lot downtown, Smiley's Used Cars. Smiley's, you've probably heard of it. Please don't kill me, please, please. I don't know anything. I don't belong here. Just let me go." He was not sure if the lie would work, but he had to try. He was ashamed at his fear. He loathed his cowardice. He wanted to yell at the man every obscenity he knew, but all he could do was pee himself, cry, and lie to try and save his own hide. He was the very living definition of the word pathetic. The man released him, and Jared smacked back down onto the concrete, whimpering like a beat dog. He waited for the dark shadow above him to just pull the trigger and put him out of his misery. "Where is Big Chuck now?" the voice in the darkness asked. I don't know. Last time I heard he was upstairs in his office. I don't know now." Jared hated himself for giving up the man he had only moments ago sworn silent allegiance to. But the truth was, he was a coward. He'd always been a coward. Coming here was stupid. What did you think he was going to change? Did you think he was going to somehow instantly become Big Chuck's right-hand man just because of what was in the paperwork he brought along with him? It was a foolish notion to begin with. He was a nobody, a cowardly, weak nobody. Had always been a nobody. Would always be a nobody. Maybe this guy would just pull that trigger and finish him. It would be a fitting end to a miserable life. "Do it," he quietly begged. "Just pull the trigger. Do it now. Don't wait. Just get it over with. Do it. What are you waiting for?" Nothing happened, though. No bullet in the brain bucket like he deserved, like he hoped. No escape from this life of depression and misery. No more questions either. Just nothing. Nothing except for the howling wind outside, complete with crashing thunder. Light, once more, dimly lit the hallway from a flickering blast of the storm. He was alone, he realized. The dark stranger of death had left him to his whimpering, lying in a puddle of his own pee. Chapter break. Perspective change. 4 more soldiers lost their life to DJ's sneak attack from his second-floor entrance. He caught them coming down a hallway, 2 in front and 2 behind. When he stepped around the corner, they must have thought him to be another one of their rank. He used their momentary confusion to his advantage and rattled off 4 shots that were viciously quick and accurate. He was getting better at this. His feeling of invincibility was growing. Big Chuck had no idea what was headed his way. 9 rounds left in his offhand weapon, 9 in his right, fully loaded backup on his vest. His quick handling of the 4 in the hallway was completely silent. Not only did the suppressors muffle the sound of shots being fired, but the thunderstorm that rampaged outside and beat upon the building he was now in drowned out the remaining sounds of gunshots. It efficiently erased all noise of his passing. Everything was, indeed, working in his favor now, and he needed to press that advantage. He found a set of stairs pointed up and down next to a freight elevator that sat lifeless with its doors closed. If he went down, he would surely meet a lot of well-armed bad guys. Big Chuck could be down there leading the fight like a good general should. In fact, that certainly seemed like his style. considering he was probably really torqued over the fact that all of his boys were now dead. However, the last place he saw him was on the 4th floor, looking down at DJ like a king from his castle. It was also likely that since he knew he was the target, he would dangle himself like a carrot for DJ to go after, leading him through the gauntlet of enemy soldiers. Up it was. On the landing between the 2nd and 3rd floors, he met another armed man coming down. This one was not like any of the rest. He was wearing a suit, probably a higher-ranking person in charge of the day-to-day affairs, or maybe even a client or associate. Irrespective of who he was, the black man with diamond earrings and the chrome-covered beretta took a round right through the teeth. He fell backwards and dropped the gun. He did not die right away, but twitched and blew bloody bubbles as he rolled around on the landing. Not wanting to waste another bullet, DJ simply watched him slowly die, his thrashing and rolling around from pain fading off to nothing. Emotionless, he then moved on towards the 3rd floor. He was going to pass the 3rd floor completely and just go all the way to the top, but with his night vision goggles to aid him, he ran across another person. This one was dressed in jeans and a polo, not apparently armed, and as blind as a bat in the darkness of the 3rd floor hallway. DJ paused and just stared at him for a moment. The man was coming right for him, eyes opened wide but completely unseeing. It was made all the more apparent by the fact he held both hands out in front of him, clawing at the darkness. DJ considered just grabbing one of the arms and yanking the guy forward into the stairs, letting him tumble down and maybe snap his full neck. However, he might be able to glean some valuable intel from him. After all, he certainly didn't look like a fighter, more like a pencil pusher, someone who might know where Big Chuck was in this monstrosity of a building, someone who might be pliable to questioning. The black man on the stairs looked like he might have known something too, but he was armed and had night vision goggles, so DJ had little choice but to take him out before the other guy shot him first. DJ stepped to one side of the young man and pistol whipped him. Not too hard, because he didn't want to kill him, at least not yet. The clueless victim spun around from the blow and went down face first into the concrete floor. DJ stepped in and planted a foot hard into the man's side, and the guy curled up gasping. Next, DJ bent down and grabbed a handful of clothing with his offhand, yanked him over, and pulled him up from the ground just a bit by his shirt collar. He pointed the barrel at his nose. Lightning flashed through the window from somewhere above him. A long, lingering, strobing blast of light revealed everything to the guy he crouched over. It showed his hapless victim just how much trouble he was in. Once recognition had settled across the unknown person's bloody face, DJ raised his voice above the volume of the storm outside and demanded to know who he was. The other began to stutter and babble, so DJ shook him hard and pressed the barrel of the silencer to his forehead. He made his demand again, and this time, the frightened victim below him emptied himself in a rush of words. He was not only a victim of DJ's assault, but apparently a victim of Big Chuck himself. At least, that is what he claimed. DJ briefly deliberated over the other's explanation. It was possible the man was lying. In fact, considering where he now stood, it was even probable the man was lying just to try to save himself. However, he was completely unarmed. Would a servant and soldier of Big Chuck roam around completely unarmed? He doubted it. If he let the man loose, and he really was a minion of Big Chuck, he could head downstairs and alert the others they missed their intruder, and he was already in the building. His element of surprise would be lost. If he was just an innocent bystander in all of this, and DJ took his life, could he live with himself? In truth, if he killed the man, DJ probably would never know. But he was sure this moment, should he live to see tomorrow, would haunt him for the rest of his life, wondering if he had murdered an innocent man. Decisions, decisions. He let go of the man's shirt collar and the guy dropped back down to the floor. It was then he noticed it looked like the man had relieved himself in his fear. A darker splotch covered the man's groin area and was spreading even wider as DJ watched. Awesome, DJ thought to himself. This was the second man tonight he had scared so bad they wet themselves like a schoolgirl. Between repeatedly having the wind knocked out of him and grown men urinating all over themselves, it was like there was a running theme here. DJ ordered the man to tell him where Big Chuck was. The frightened young guy claimed he was not entirely sure, but he had last known him to be in his 4th floor office. Since the 4th floor was the last place DJ had seen Big Chuck, he left the man there and continued his climb up the stairs. He would take the risk the man really was another victim to Big Chuck's cruelty. In the end, it was the puddle of urine and no firearm that helped him decide. On the 4th floor, he saw no one. He found another hallway that led him to sets of doors on either side, 4 sets of large single doors to his right, and 1 set of double doors to his left. Double doors seemed like a better choice for Big Chuck's office. He moved to the large entranceway and pressed his ear to the wood. There was little chance he could hear anything above the roar of the storm, but he thought he would try anyway. It was louder up here with the metal roof 15 or so feet above his head. The torrential rain beating above created a jet-like engine roar in his ears. It was impossible to hear anything. He tried the door next and found it unlocked. Standing to one side, he reached out to push it open just a crack. He half expected bullets to start punching through, splintering the wood around him. But nothing happened. Peeking through the door revealed a larger room beyond, and lightning flashed outside to brightly illuminate the area within. The light was so bright it overloaded his goggles from the glare. He removed them from his head and peeked into the room again. From where he stood, with the door open just a crack, he could only make out a thin portion of the area beyond. Seeing nothing, he backed up into the hallway and swapped magazines. He also dropped his pack to the ground so he would be unencumbered. This was it, he decided, the moment he had been waiting for. He would go in with full mags and lay waste to anything that moved. With a round in each chamber and a full mag to support each of the 3 identical guns he possessed, he had 53 rounds of 9mm ammunition readily at his disposal, not counting, of course, the multitude of extra ammunition he was equipped with. Plus his backup. He almost forgot about the small Glock in his waistband. He couldn't forget about that. The last time he did, he almost died as a result. He pushed open the door further with the silenced barrel of the gun in his right hand. Just a bit more. Creeping and slow, he pushed the door open. The storm was at its most fierce now, and the flashing light was an almost non-stop strobing, paired with a relentless harsh crashing of thunder. It echoed and rolled through both the building and his brain, impossibly loud, incredibly bright, furious. DJ had never seen a storm like this. He never knew one could be so bad. It vibrated deep in his chest, and the air was charged with excess electricity. On the right-hand side of the room, he could see a gigantic wall of thin-paned windows. Many were broken, and the wind and rain poured through in a flood and a fury. Above him, the roof began to shake and vibrate, increasingly harder as the seconds ticked away. It was as if the storm were about to yank the roof off of his head. A screeching of metal snapped his attention back to the windows. Through them, and the constant strobing of light, he could see a building beyond. If DJ had his bearings correct, it was the same one he had caused an explosion in. The wind was peeling back the roof like it was a gigantic can opener. The metal ripping apart was even louder and harsher than the incredible storm that drove it. DJ looked up to the ceiling above his head. Was this building next? Was the storm about to eat him before he even got the chance to end Big Chuck's life? He could not wait to see if that was going to happen. The time was now. He had to get this done. Rushing through the door was foolish at best, but he had to trust in the crazy series of fate and chance that allowed him to get this far. He had to trust that his training with the 2 guns at the ready in both hands would help to ensure his victory. He kicked open the doors and swung both weapons up, his eyes racing across the room, scanning, taking it all in, searching for his target, his enormous target. The room was bathed in what was now a seemingly steady glow of harsh white light, the lightning fanning through the sky and striking buildings everywhere around him with steady intensity. Wind drove rain through the broken glass panes like bullets from a gun. They stabbed at him like so many angry needles, trying to distract him. Do one thing. Do it well. Move on. Run your race. Reach for the prize. The finish line is almost at hand. The room was devoid of human life, save his. No Big Chuck. Just one big gigantic oaken table, smashed in 2, broken on the floor of the warehouse like a giant twig, reduced to kindling. One entire table leg was even snapped off and missing. Had Big Chuck done that? Was he really that strong? Had he been enraged by DJ's actions to the point where he snapped a table in half, like a matchstick? Whatever happened, as soon as he laid eyes on his enemy, he had to empty his guns into every vital area. He could not risk letting someone so large and so strong and so angry get his hands on him. the man would rip him apart. Another set of double doors stood on the far side of the room, open and inviting. They beckoned DJ forward. That must be the room DJ had seen him standing in, the room with the smashed windows he had looked down on DJ from, his office, according to the guy he found on the 3rd floor. He was waiting for him, DJ knew, waiting in that room for a final ending to this hours-long saga. That knowledge reverberated in his brain louder than even the storm around him. He was not hiding in his office, DJ knew. He was lying in wait, a far cry different than cowering in fear. The man was a killer, a seasoned and efficient killer, and he was clothed in proud arrogance that nothing had ever withstood him. Anything he had ever turned his gaze to bowed before him in fearful submission. His overconfidence and pride would be his undoing, DJ thought. How did the saying go? Pride cometh before a fall. Wasn't that a scripture in the Bible too? Well, DJ was confident too, and filled with single-minded purpose. He would be the reason for that fall. He would fell the mighty giant like the David in the Bible. He would introduce Big Chuck to the reality that nothing lasted forever. He was victory. He was death. He was judge, jury, and executioner. He shouted a roar worthy of every warrior who ever lived, and charged through the open door on the far end of the room in a rush of blind determination and hubris. 2 things happened as he crossed the threshold of what he determined to be the office door. The first was the constant white flickering glow of unceasing lightning, suddenly winked out for a moment, like someone had thrown a switch. Without the aid of the night vision goggles, and with his eyes now fully accustomed to the harsh light produced by the storm, he was plunged into absolute darkness for a good 5 seconds before the next blast. In that black void of time is when the second thing happened. Someone, that person could only be Big Chuck, he reasoned, hit him with something large and heavy, right in his middle. It was as if DJ had rushed into the path of a moving bus. His feet left the ground, his body doubled over in a human-shaped U, and he flew backwards back through the door he had charged through, just like another piece of wind-driven debris. Once more, the breath left his body, but not like the other times before. This time was different. This time was more intense. This time felt like something had removed his ability to breathe completely, like some great beast had reached down into him and ripped out his lungs. The combat vest he wore did absorb some of the blow. Beneath that, a bulletproof vest had dissipated even more of the impact. Both, he processed in his brain, combined to save his life, but it did not save him from the pain of living through the trauma. He felt ribs crack from the impact. It was likely there was some internal bleeding as well. That was confirmed a second later by the metallic taste of blood on his lips, driven into his mouth by ruptured blood vessels in his lungs bursting and exiting under the massive blow. The sudden collision of whatever struck him introduced so much pain into his already bruised body, he did not even feel himself striking the floor and slide across the rough surface. His brain knew it and informed his conscience, but he did not feel it. He was dazed. He was hurt. He was defenseless. And he suddenly realized he was unarmed. Both handheld weapons had disappeared into the night, released from his grasp to tumble away into the darkness as he flew across the room. He stared upwards into the blackened ceiling as his brain processed the sudden change in direction. Fate was on his side, he had thought. His skill and focus served him so well up to this point. How had it failed him? Why had that unseen favor that seemed to assist him through this long fight suddenly vanish? The steady illumination of lightning was back, revealing his foe standing above him, his incredibly large, ragingly angry foe. A vicious smile was etched to the man's chiseled face, and his eyes held a fire that mimicked the lightning crashing all around them. Held in one hand was the missing large oak table leg from behind him. He held it in one clenched fist like a giant caveman's club. Big Chuck had swung it like a baseball bat, DJ realized. As he struggled to breathe, he was amazed he was even still alive. He had not fathomed that he would be here. He was the obvious loser in this exchange, and the last image he was going to see was this gorilla of a man about to hammer down on him with the makeshift club of a table leg. It would be an embarrassing end. The weapon on his vest, in the cross-draw holster, he remembered. He reached for it as fast as he could, but his arms felt heavy and sluggish, like he was trying to move them through a sea of molasses. Big Chuck dropped the table leg, reached down, and ripped the gun, holster and all, from the vest with a violent pull. It tore away easily in his fingers. The stitching from the molly attachment, likely damaged from the impact of the table leg, was unable to resist the strength of the man above him. The giant tossed it harmlessly away. The big man reached down then, wrapped both meaty hands around his neck, and lifted. DJ was hoisted from the floor with seemingly little effort, and Big Chuck held him like a doll to look him in the eyes. Still smiling, he held them for a moment, then switched his hands around before DJ was strangled to death. One hand gripped the top of his combat vest under his chin, and the other let him go completely. Big Chuck dragged him through the room then, facing upwards like a large human-shaped duffel bag, past the broken table in the middle of the room, past the double doors DJ had first come through. Into the hallway beyond he was dragged. DJ was helpless to try and stop him. He was groggy. He could not breathe. He was having trouble focusing. Every square inch of his body let out a trumpet blast of pain. Through another set of double doors, across the hallway he had come from, he was pulled along. He was dragged into another large room with a giant set of wooden doors on the opposite side. The doors were obviously set into the outside wall, as light flashed and winked through the cracks, and the doors shook and rattled from the berating of the wind and the storm. Big Chuck approached the doors, still dragging DJ along, and now DJ was beginning to get enough strength back to try and resist. It was a hopeless effort, though, as the angle he was in, being dragged along backwards, gave him little in the way of leverage to try and twist away. He clawed at the man's one hand that clutched at his combat vest, but it was like clawing at unfeeling granite. DJ was helpless against the stronger man, and he was wounded and beaten beyond the ability to put up much of a fight. Big Chuck paused as he got close, and with a mighty thrust of one leg, kicked the doors open into the storm beyond. The full weight of wind and rain tore violently into the room like the breath of God. It drove stinging rain into DJ's face, and he blinked against the onslaught. Big Chuck, however, seemed unaffected. The giant man looked outward from the fourth-floor vantage point, and DJ now realized where he was. It was an old upper storage room on the fourth floor, and the opening into the storm that Big Chuck had kicked free was a loading door. It was a type where large items were hoisted upwards by ropes and pulleys into a storage loft high above, the same way hay bales used to be loaded into the upper levels of barns back in the day. He realized what was about to happen. Big Chuck was going to throw him from the room and watch him crack open against the ground like a Humpty Dumpty egg. Big Chuck turned away from the storm then and dragged DJ back to the door they had first entered. He dropped him to the ground like a sack of trash, then switched and grabbed DJ's ankles with both hands. In that span of time outside of Big Chuck's grasp, DJ tried to launch himself from the ground, but his muscles barely responded to his demands. His body was just too battered. The big man smiled at him. He could see DJ now knew what was about to happen to him. Again, DJ remembered the backup gun at his waist. 6 more rounds of hollow point 9mm ammunition awaited his orders, each one containing over 300 foot-pounds of energy to be directed by DJ's commands. And he commanded them now. DJ reached under the folds of his vest and clothing and produced the small gun. In his beaten, breathless, desperate state, however, he tossed accuracy and skill out of the window. He simply pointed into the center of the massive muscle that was Big Chuck and started squeezing off shots. All 6 rounds tore into Big Chuck, and there was an instantaneous reaction from this sudden attack, though not exactly the one DJ expected. The man simply let go, calmly stepped forward, and grabbed the thing from DJ's hands just as the slide locked to the rear, emptied and worthless, just like DJ now felt. Like nothing had happened, like there were not 6 slugs dug deep into his body, Big Chuck flung the weapon aside and reached down to grab DJ's ankles once more. With the growl of an unchained beast, Big Chuck began to charge back across the room. DJ towed bouncing along behind, building momentum and speed as he closed the distance to the open loading door. Big Chuck was going to hurl DJ from the 4th floor like an Olympian hurling a hammer. And DJ's focus on how many things had gone his way in this fight, on how it seemed like an unseen hand from the heavens had been helping him out, he now realized the hubris he claimed Big Chuck to be full of had somehow overcome him as well. It had clouded his judgment with a pride that rendered him weakened and vulnerable. Pride cometh before a fall, he now remembered thinking about Big Chuck. But it was his own pride that had now caused his own downfall. He suddenly felt stupid and embarrassed at himself. Big Chuck had won. And the worst thing about that overwhelming realization was not that he was about to die, but that the only other people he cared about were now going to die as well. Because of him, Brett was going to die. Big Chuck would find him and his wife and probably torture them to death. Mary was going to die as well, for no other reason than DJ had sought refuge in her home. Abby was going to die, and who knew what unspeakable things the beast would do to such a beautiful creature. God, please forgive me of my vanity and pride, he silently prayed. Then, like divine intervention from the heavens above, DJ saw the most unbelievable and impossible thing. As he watched, a single bullet from behind him, likely from the entrance to the room, bore its way straight through Big Chuck's face and exited with a splatter of blood and shards of bone from the back of his skull. He instantly lost his grip on DJ, but the momentum from his charge continued to carry Big Chuck out the open loading door and into the waiting storm. DJ came to a sliding rest a split second later, his lower legs protruding off the edge, hanging 4 floors above the pavement below. For a moment, he simply stared out into the rain, wind, and flashing light in abject shock. What on earth had just happened? He rolled over then, looking behind him to find the shooter, and was shocked into submission once more. There, standing with feet shoulder-width apart, service pistol raised, still aiming through the open sights and wearing Mary Jackson's donated shirt that read Relentless Youth across the chest, was Special Agent Brett Foster. DJ rolled back over onto his back and simply began to laugh. Rain drove into his exposed face, but he didn't care. He was alive. They were all alive. It was an ending he could have never dreamed up in any fantasy, but he didn't care. It was over. The good guys won. The bad guys lost. And it brought laughter to his bruised face. Brett approached and looked down at him with obvious bewilderment. "Are you okay?" "Agent Foster, my hero. How in the world did you get past all of the guys on the first floor?" "Oh, that," he replied with a shrug. "I had no idea they were there. But before I could head in and get ambushed, the wind ripped the roof off of a building next door. I guess they decided that was enough for them, and they just began running in all directions like a bunch of cockroaches when you turn the lights on. It was crazy, really. They all streamed out of the building like their hair was on fire. A few of them ran right past me like I wasn't even there." DJ laughed harder at the news. "Look," Brett began, "I'm glad you think all this is real funny, but the cavalry is on its way. My guys, not the locals. They should be here in a few minutes, though, and you need to be gone when they do." DJ smiled up at Brett and said, "Help me up, please." Brett complied and helped DJ struggle to his feet. Every part of him hurt. Every part of him was exhausted, and just getting to his feet involved serious effort and will. "Listen to me close," Brett commanded, leaning in so DJ could hear him over the wind. He pointed in a direction. "There's a building next door over that way. There's a cell of roll-up doors that are partially open. If you duck under, you'll find a big room with some box trucks. If you're lucky, you'll find some keys somewhere close. Pick one and get out of here. Oh, and make sure you look around really good before you leave. Make it fast, though. You don't have much time." DJ smiled at Brett and nodded his consent. "If I ever see you again, Agent Foster," his voice trailed off. Brett shook his head and a stern look settled into his eyes. "I better not ever see you again, or you'll be in handcuffs. Are we clear on that?" "Crystal," DJ answered, and he made his way to the door. He paused in the entrance and looked at Brett one last time, then slipped through the hallway. He stopped to retrieve the night vision goggles and backpack laying where he left them. He slipped both on and quickly headed down the stairs. He hoped he encountered no one else. For one thing, he was both physically and mentally spent. Secondly, he was back to being unarmed. Aside from the pistol and knife he knew to be stowed in the depths of the pack, he had nothing left to defend himself with, and really didn't feel like stopping to dig out the gun. Besides, if he did retrieve the gun, and if he happened to run into the FBI while trying to leave, they would likely just shoot him if he was armed. As he made his way down the stairs, he noted something going on in the background. The storm was beginning to quiet, rapidly. By the time he made it to the ground floor entrance, it had fallen off to nothing more than a drizzle. He could still hear thunder and see lightning, but It was now further to the east. It was as if Mother Nature decided that it was no longer needed as a distraction and was headed someplace else. DJ smiled. He stepped out of the building and ran right into the broken body of Big Chuck lying in a shattered heap on the ground. He paused only a moment to stare at the body of the man that had dominated so much of his life recently. That momentary pause was all the respect he showed the deceased, and he stepped over the body and moved on. It did not take him long to find the building Brett mentioned, and he crawled under the roll-up door like instructed. With his goggles making the blacked-out void visible, he spotted a handful of box trucks parked in a neat row, just like the agent told him. He turned around to find the chain that controlled the doors and began to pull on it to roll the big door open. It squeaked and groaned, but rolled up without a lot of effort. It was a good thing, too. DJ did not have much effort left to give. With the door all the way open, it was now clear for one of the trucks to pull through, so he made his way to the first one in line. The door was unlocked, and the keys were dangling in the ignition. "Thank you," he said out loud. Climbing into the driver's seat, he placed his foot on the brake, pulled the goggles off, and briefly checked the side mirror before starting. He paused at what he saw in the glow of the red brake lights. He went ahead and turned the key, and the diesel engine fired to life. He found the headlights and flipped them on, then climbed back out of the truck to make his way to the rear. He could not believe what he was looking at in the light of the taillights. 6 large pallets were stacked in a neat little row, just like the trucks lined up in front of them. On the wooden pallets were stacks and stacks of $100 bills and bundles of $10,000 each. Each pallet was wrapped in what looked to be clear cellophane to keep them all held together under transport. Each pallet stood approximately 4 feet in height. There had to be hundreds of millions of dollars he was looking at, maybe more. The pallet behind his truck had been torn into, and someone had pulled a few bundles off the top. Someone grabbing a few parting gifts on their way out the door, he thought. He turned back around, flipped the latch to the door of the back of the truck, and pushed it out of the way. He was shocked into inaction once again. The back of the truck was full of weapons racks. All types of firearms were locked into portable metal trays, a few hundred of them. Pistols, rifles, shotguns. It was a mobile armory. Enough weapons lined the back of the truck in long rows to outfit a small army. He whistled out loud. This Big Chuck guy was into everything. He turned back to the pallet of cash and started slinging bundles into the back of the truck. As fast as he could, he threw the money over his shoulder, not caring where or how it landed. He did not do it too terribly long. He didn't have a lot of time to spend, according to Brett. He figured the cash would come in handy with trying to set Miss Jackson up with a new identity and a nice little pension to take care of her for the rest of her life. Plus, it would take care of any immediate needs in order to establish a new life for himself. He didn't think the FBI would harass her too long or ask too many questions that she really required a new identity, but she deserved some peace from everything she had gone through. Plus, the cash would replace the income she lost with the murder of her husband. That was enough, he decided, and rolled the door back down, latching it into place. If he had to guess, there were $3 or $4 million laying loose and scattered in the back of the truck. Then, without another thought, he climbed back into the cab and drove out of the building. It took him a minute or two of zigzagging his way around through the warehouses, but he eventually found an open gate that led him back into the city. In his tired, worn-out state of mind, he didn't notice the car lights that flipped on as he drove past and start to follow him away into the night.